suddenly emerge. The discussion will be a de facto warm-up to a classroom course that we will be teaching in Denmark later this year. And if you're interested to participate in our hopefully physical course in Denmark later, visit our website, Google Denmark and Israel, and under the Innovation Center, you will find more information. After the discussion today, I will give the floor to Morten Møller from the Early Warning Initiative in Denmark, which is an important initiative for companies that face difficulties. So, today we will hear 3 different perspectives on how a startup can become more resilient. First, we'll meet Natalie Meiri, the Global Digital and IT Innovation Director at Nestle, which is the largest food and beverage company in the world. And prior to joining Nestle, Natalie was the managing director of 8200 Impact, the first Israeli social tech accelerator. And she will, of course, share her experience from there, and we're very excited to have you here. Thank you so much. The same goes for Kfir Nissan, who is the founder and CEO of Valid Network. And he will tell us a little bit about how he managed to scale his business very successfully this year, in spite of the crisis that we are facing. Last but not least, we'll meet Miki Halavsky, a serial entrepreneur and co-founder at Rapid API, the world's largest API marketplace, which serves more than 2 million developers. And you also have some very interesting insights on how to navigate and actually make the most out of a crisis that we're in today. So, very excited. So let's get started. And if you have questions, and this is for the participant, just bump in, don't hold back. We would like the discussion to be as free and informal as possible. Nessa, the floor is yours.
So good morning, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. My name is Natalie, and I will share my screen with you because I did prepare a presentation a little bit about myself and about my recent activity. And hopefully I'll also manage to assist some of you entrepreneurs in building your startup in the right way. So maybe a little bit about me. So currently I'm the Global Digital and IT Innovation Director at Nestle, as you said, the largest food and beverage company in the world. In my non-spare time, I'm an MBA student at the Technion, the Israeli Institute of Technology. On top of that, I'm a certified lawyer. I studied my Bachelor of Laws degree at Tel Aviv University. Also in my non-spare time, I'm a mentor, mostly for gender equality and underprivileged youth. I'm also a member of the World Economic Forum Global Shapers community. Previously, I was the managing director of 8200 Impact. It was the first Israeli social tech accelerator, a marketing manager at a startup called Insidix for network access control startup that was acquired by Intel. Prior to that, I was the director of business development at Digitronics. It was a hardware company, and just like the same way in Israel, you always have to talk also about your military service. So I was the head of formulation section, and prior to that, an English intelligence analyst at 8200 unit. It's Israel's cybersecurity and signal intelligence unit. Many of the successful entrepreneurs in Israel started in this unit, and I'm very proud to be also part of this unit and also part of the 8200 Alumni Association. So I decided to give you some 5 strong tips about how to build a resilient startup. Let's start from the beginning. I think that one of the best qualities of entrepreneurs is the fact that they're all highly optimistic. I think this is a prerequisite for entrepreneurs. Otherwise, they will not be able to run their startup in a good way. But the main problem is that the reality is not necessarily the same way that the entrepreneurs perceive it. So I gathered some of the best tips for building the resilient startup that you want to have. So I think that first and foremost, it's finding the right partners. There is a huge importance of having the right companions along the way. I know it's not a Catholic wedding, and a lot of startups get to change co-founders and their founding team. But on the other hand, it is very important to have, it's a long distance marathon. It's not a sprint, and there is a huge importance of the people that you work with. So first, finding a good professional fit to have good and complementing abilities and expertise of the founding team. For example, if one of the team members has vast technological background, so it makes a lot of sense for the other one to have business skills and acumen. And of course, to have a strong chemistry between the founders, because even if on the paper you could be a good fit for another founder, eventually, if you don't see things the same way, if you're not aligned, if you don't feel like you can work together, it's not going to work in a good way. Personally, I suggest as a tip to have a 30-day trial. By the way, even more is okay. But I do think it's going to allow you to have a better understanding of the other person's thoughts, insights on things, perspective of how to overcome the differences and challenges and problems and difficulties that you will experience, not even might, along the way. And as a lawyer, but it's not a legal advice, I do think that having a founder's agreement is going to be very good tool for you, especially if the relationship is not equal. For example, if one of the founders is not working full-time on the startup and while the other one is. So I do think it's going to be very helpful for all of you to have a document that just put things on paper, and later on, if things escalate, I do think it's going to be a good and a proper solution. So one more thing that I get to see many entrepreneurs that usually do not have a strong and in-depth market understanding. It is very important to understand the target markets that you are aiming for in terms of culture, regulation, existing solution and competition, intellectual property policy, and so on. It is very important to understand the different distinguishments between, for example, the American market versus Asian markets, different ways of the potential customers. Either it's a B2B startup or a B2C startup. It's very important to understand how do you penetrate these markets? How do you reach out to them? In some of the cultures, for example, in Asian cultures, it's mostly based on the ongoing relationships, and you do need to acquire these people's trust and to have strong and personal relationships with them. In terms of, for example, intellectual property, you do need to understand that in some markets, this field is not as like going legal as should be. And this is also a thing to consider once you do decide which target markets you aim to start working with. One more thing that many people do not really talk about is the promises to investors. I know that many startups, when they speak with investors, they have this desire to please the investors, to make a lot of promises that they do think, because they are very optimistic, that they would achieve. But the main problem is that if these promises are unrealistic, it might cause a lot of problems once you do complete the investment round. So in terms of forecasting the number of users, in terms of R&D schedule, maybe times of release to market, and maybe revenue projection, all of these aspects, once they're not aligned with the investors, it might create a lot of problems, because don't forget that the investors are not only the ones to impress, but rather also they're going to be your partners down the road. So what is happening when you close the funding? Have to admit that for many entrepreneurs, investment, they see investment as the target. You ask US startups, so what do you want to achieve? I want to have a $2 million seed round, for example. But it is very important to understand that investment is just a milestone. It's not the target itself. It allows you to scale the company, to hire more people, to have more markets involved. But it's not the target itself, because it's going to enable you to grow. So many startups in this case, they're very fascinated by the fact that they had raised an investment, and then they tend to have a high burn rate, which means that they spend a lot of money from the very beginning for elements that are not necessarily required at this standpoint. And it might be very problematic down the road once you do aim to have to raise more funds, because of course you will have to show the burn rate and to explain each and every expense down the road. And of course, as I mentioned about the investors, they're becoming your partners. So you do have a burden of proof to show the investors that you do get to manage your money properly, and you don't spend money on elements that are not very required or relevant at this standpoint. So maybe a little bit about the growth stage. After you do raise the funds, and after you do get good investors to align with you and to trust you, I think that in this standpoint, there are a lot of other challenges that are different than making investors invest in you. So first and foremost, it's understanding the obstacles. For example, if you're a Danish startup and you do want to penetrate into the US market, it's maybe also understanding the different cultures, following the previous tip on different target audiences. So in this case, maybe you do need to give control to other people. It means leaving your ego aside and not necessarily being able to be the CEO anymore, because this would be the best decision for the company at its growth stage. So it's understanding the obstacles, understanding geographical barriers, understanding other cultural differences, understanding that the relevant target audiences should be the ones that would dictate the rest of the company's roadmap. And opening branches, as mentioned, if you do want to have global growth and expansion, you need to understand which branches would be the best ones for you to open, to have representatives, boots on the ground that understand these obstacles that I mentioned, and of course to give up leadership when needed. So these were my tips. I tried to do this as fast as possible because I knew that I was limited into 10 minutes. Feel free to ask questions either now or on the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Netta. Very interesting. I actually have a question because, I totally agree about the giving up control element, but it's when is the right moment to actually give up control, because it's a sensitive issue, and it's something that most of us has a hard time doing because we like control. So when do you know? When do you see indications of now it's the right time?
Yeah, for sure. So first, I think that once you do try to penetrate into markets that you're not well acquainted with, for example, if you're a Danish entrepreneur seeking to penetrate into the US market, I think that once you do start to have, maybe the first conversations with US big corporates, for example, if you're a B2B startup. So, like having these first, honesty, just like in job interviews, if you do have like your, main US customer, okay, that you think that should be the best one, I wouldn't start it with this one, right? Because you do need to have some trials before you do get to approach these relevant US corporates. So for example, I would have started small, and also I would have tried to make contact with, for example, US Americans that know the culture, well acquainted with specifically also the vertical that you were active in. For example, if you're a cybersecurity startup, so maybe to find a person, a Native American, a person that is well acquainted with the American culture, but also with the cybersecurity section within the American market, just to understand like what are the trends now, what would be relevant for each and every company. And once you do start working with such a person, by the way, you can start working with this person as a freelance, for example, just on a trial. And then once you do see that this person gives you good results, maybe also to consider nominating this person as the head of Americas, for example. Because I do think that the differences are incredibly significant between countries. I see it all the time on my current position at Nestle and on previous positions at 8200 Impact that I managed to interview hundreds of startups. And I do think that the main problem is like not understanding the market that you are trying to reach. And too bad that it's going to be, you know, your go, no go, because it's a prerequisite for many companies and also consumers if you're B2C. So understanding this, the other culture and the differences.
Yeah, because there's a paradox, which is we want our startups to be global, but in order to be global, we have to be extremely local.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Any more questions, comments before we move on? Thank you. So let's give the floor to Kfir.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Kfir. I don't have any slides, so I'll try to be as fluent as possible. My name is Kfir, and I'm the CEO of Valid Network. Valid Network is a startup in a seed stage doing cybersecurity for blockchain business applications. We started about 2 years ago when everything was quiet, without COVID. We started in Beersheba. It's a small city in Israel, about an hour and a half from Tel Aviv, from the center of the startup nation. 2 words about myself. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 10 years. Some say that I'm an entrepreneur for the last 30 years. I've got a bachelor's degree in computer science, did several startups, raised about $20 million in the past. And I love mentoring startups. And when Ira first approached me and said, let's talk about how do we deal with a startup in a crisis time, I thought about it a lot. And I think that there are 3 main things that I would like to share. We raised from our investors $8 million in a seed stage, so it's quite a big amount, both from Israeli startups and both from Israeli VC and the US-based VC. And I think that one of the biggest things that the startup needs to evaluate when he raises money is the relationships that he has with his investors. And this relationship is one of the strongest key elements that stand out when there is a crisis in place. For us, as a small startup from a small suburb in Israel, to raise money from a US investor, one of the leading US investors in the world for cybersecurity, named 1011, was a very, very difficult process. Most of the VCs globally love Israel as a startup nation, but they love Tel Aviv. And it sounds strange because Israel is such a small country, but there is a huge difference between Tel Aviv and the rest of the country. And when I approached the global VC ecosystem, I found myself traveling, and it was like a 6 months of continuous traveling globally. And we've built a relationship. And today that's our strongest key. When I look at the crisis, I think that what I can share with you is like, I wrote some things down, so it's just to stay focused, is don't wait. Don't wait. As any other relationship that you might have, is the first thing you need to do in a crisis is to communicate the good and the bad. Okay, company, a small company like us, we are today 15 people, and at the beginning of COVID, our entire market assumptions were eliminated. Okay? We assumed that we'll have X amount of clients in our pipeline. We assumed that the blockchain market will flourish. We assumed a specific amount of money going into blockchain investments, and everything was eliminated. And COVID really deleted everything, and we needed to start it from scratch. And the first thing that I did was communicate with my investors in a very open way, and discussions, the fruitful discussions that we had, is part of where we are today. They connected us to the right, let's say, mentors. They connected us to the right peers in the industry. They enabled us not to pivot. Okay, don't run and pivot, but open your eyes and look to the sides. Okay? One of the things that we've done was, if our originally go-to-market strategy was coming out as a SaaS product for big enterprises looking to secure their blockchain implementations, we changed our go-to-market and we opened up a SOC offering. SOC offering is a security operations center. So today we are the first and only security operations center as a service for blockchain, and we are delivering our service, our expertise as a service, our security. And this enabled us to create an amazing pipeline that we cannot support today. And it was a steady work of communicating with our team. At the beginning, I think about 8 months ago, we had a lot of employees leaving our company because the entire work environment changed. And today, when someone is living in the suburbs and he wants to work for big companies, he can basically do that because everybody works remote. So as a management team, me and my co-founder, my partner, we had to adjust in terms of how do we bring new staff on board, how do we recruit new team members, with that adjustment in place. And we started hiring, not focusing on Beersheba, not focusing on New York. We have 7 team members working fully remote, and our HR manager basically learned how to retain, or she's still learning, retaining employees. I think this is the toughest part that I see during COVID. And we are investing a lot of money and resources retaining employees. We are growing constantly, and we are looking for 10 more employees globally. And we are now about to hire our new VP of sales in Germany, for example. This is something I never thought of doing before COVID, but everything in terms of working remotely made everything much easier for us. And I think that my biggest take from COVID was patience. As an entrepreneur, we are always running. We're always running very, very fast. We have huge commitments to our investors, to our clients, to our employees. We made huge promises. and we're always running. But COVID made me think, made me bring patience into the game, because we understood that some of our expectations that we've put in front of ourselves for the next year will maybe take a little bit longer, and we need to learn how to take a breath and work a little bit slower. So as I said, I think that the first thing is patience. The second thing is, at the same time, your patience, don't wait, communicate all the time, communicate with the surrounding, with everybody around you, and adjust. Don't pivot, don't get any, I forgot, don't be pressurized into doing very big changes, but look around and adjust. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Kfir, I want to ask something. Many of the people said that the challenges that they're experiencing is either having the work-life balance, being with the kids at home, work from home, and also not seeing the people in the office. How did you, when you're working remotely, how do you deal with that? And like, how is the people in your company dealing with the lack of human interaction, also with the clients, but with the people in the office?
Okay, very interesting question. Thank you. So I'd love to share success stories that working remote is fun, is contributing, is making everything much better. But working remote it's very complicated. A lot of the people don't know how to adjust to it. Some of the employees love to work remotely, but basically what they love is not to work. Okay, they stay home, they show up to meetings, they do the minimum of what is expected of them. And it's very hard to bring everyone together and contribute in the same amount they did before. We tried several things. Like, one of the basic things that we tried is to decide that we will leave our webcams open for the entire day, just to feel like we are in the office working together. But we've seen that the majority of the employees turn them off during the day, because everybody likes his privacy. And now, today, we have like 2 hours a day that we have scheduled meetings that nobody speaks, just open camera times. We call it like sharing time. It's 2 hours a day. We do many more meetings than we've done before. So we schedule meetings in the calendar, working together, sometimes with no specific topic, just for the sake of bringing people into Zoom, into Teams. We record a lot of our meetings so people can replay them. And I think it's a continuous effort. So in terms of investments, as I said, we are doing a lot of human resources, or I don't know what's the right term, but we have like ergonomics sessions that we bring a physiotherapist to do, like a session about sitting, relaxing, stretching. So we have once a week, we have like a yoga, but online. So there are a lot of different things. We do have 2 days a week that it's a must to come to the office. My partner lives in Tel Aviv, and it's about 1.5 hours from Beersheba, from the office. So when he arrives to the office, everybody arrives to the office. So there will be good time for sharing ideas, working together, and then everybody goes home and works separately. I think that one of the biggest problems, or not problems, but one of the biggest things that I feel when I speak with other entrepreneurs is like, we are speaking about COVID as a past event, but COVID is still here with us, and nobody really knows when it will go away. So every procedure that we adapt, we are still adapting, we're still learning. I cannot say that we figured it out. We have, as I mentioned, we have a very successful security operation going on center right now, and doing it remotely, it makes it even harder. Investigating cyber crimes in a faraway environment from one another in terms of analysts, it's very, very complicated, and there is no system to do it. So we are figuring out our procedures as we go still. So
I think it's a nice tip, you know, way out of the crisis to get a good massage or do yoga. Can never, but I mean, it's clear. It's. I think you point to like two important things here. Like patience is a virtue, also when a crisis hit, and don't stand alone with your problems, your worries, but communicate them to your closest partners, to your investors, and reach out for expertise who can help you out of the crisis, and which is something that we will touch upon later when Morten will take the floor. I will now move to Mickey, who also has managed to utilize the crisis perhaps to the benefit of his company. Mickey?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you so much for your time. And I would be very happy to do it as interactive as possible. So feel free to hop on a video call and just like turn on your video and ask any questions you have. I'll give you a short brief about myself. So I co-founded before a company called Rapid API, which is doing very, very well today. But what I will be talking about is my current business, which is Avian. And Avian is a travel technology business. So a little bit unlike anything you've heard, we had the most difficult year you could think of or even imagine. Because at some point, like our all operation, I'm talking about March 2020, our all operations stopped. And you know, we were like 15 people, and imagine the world is literally freezing. Like the customers are going into kind of a wavy mode, and all the conferences are being canceled. You know, we've been selling to both travel agencies and airlines, so they all got like the hardest hits you could basically imagine of, and probably the worst crisis that has ever happened to the travel industry after 9/11. And so you know, I will try to be you know, as straightforward as possible, and a little bit different than what Fear said before. We had to pivot. We had to pivot because there's no other way. You cannot, when the market is dead and money is not flowing through a market, you can say whatever you want, you can try whatever you want, but by the end of the day, you're not going to make any money if money is not flowing through a market, and that's, you know, that's how the world works. And so we actually had to be as creative as possible. Now you can think about the timeline. You know, we're talking March 2020. I approached all of our investors and I said, okay, so we have this crisis now. What do we do? I would be happy to get any tips. And you know, one of the closest investor to me was another pioneer from the travel industry. And he said, yeah, it will be just 2 months. Just take 2 months break. Things will be just amazing. You know, we had that with SARS 10 years ago. It just flew over. It was great. No problem. Just take a break. Take your team and just do something. And at that point, I actually believed him because I never felt or experienced anything like this. So the first thing that we did is we replaced the annual travel conference that is taking place every year in Berlin, which called ITB, and we took it online. So we created the largest online travel conference, and we gathered together more than 4,000 people, I think, online, in which they had the opportunity to listen to content, online content from travel leaders from Lufthansa and from Kiwi and from Expedia and other big corporations. And then, it went out. So we went like this 2 months. We worked for this conference. It was really great. It made significant revenue to our company. It was really, really great. Now what, right? They told me it's 2 months. What am I doing right now? And so I could clearly see that it's not going to end up pretty soon. So we started, trying to think about new stuff. And probably when crisis happens, and that's what I've learned on with this experience, is that you have to go to the basic of business. And the basic of business is start from the customer and work backwards. Is think about what is happening, what has changed, or what's the needs that customers have in your space, and see if you can meet the demand. So the other thing that we did, and I see that Anna from my team joined as well, and she was responsible for this, so all the credit goes to her. We created another great project, which was another side project of ours, and I can show it to you. It's called tripsguard.com. And what Tripsguard does, can you see my screen, by the way? Do you see Tripsguard or just my, okay, perfect. Because I have two screens, that's what I'm asking. So we created this great website, which basically aggregated all the travel restrictions during COVID and allowed more than 6 million people already to get information about where they can or can't go with travel restrictions. So for example, if you want to go to Greece, you can have basically all the information about Greece, such as if the masks are required, if the COVID test is required, if the restaurants are open, if there's a self-quarantine, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another feedback that we had on the market, that we had to basically think about how we approach the situation, which is very, very different than what our original business did, which is optimizing commissions and incentives in the travel industry. So you could clearly see that we started building different projects over and over and over again. Now, unfortunately, I can't really give you any positive, great outcomes, such as, we built $1 billion business because COVID helped us, because on the other side, we really couldn't scale in a market that shrinks. But these kind of projects really gave us the energy and the revenue needed in order to stay afloat. And the cool thing about Tripsguard specifically is that we've been able to attract Amazon, and they have integrated Tripsguard into all Alexa devices around the world, which is more than 200 million devices. And that's great. There will be a PR pretty soon about this. But that's like the power of trying to think, how do we address this specific crisis and the specific effect of this crisis in this case, and how do we work with this? Now, there are two kinds of businesses, right? If you're thinking about startups are not really businesses, regular ones that have to grow in a specific matter. The whole thing about startups is growing as fast as possible, because the returns in the venture capital worlds do not work like any other returns in anywhere else. And so it's really, really hard to scale very, very fast in a market that shrinks. So what we had to do basically at some point is to, step back and to see where we're going. And it's probably will not be 100% travel industry like we did so far. So a pivot is on the table, and it's something that we're working on. But it was really, really great to have the opportunity to feedback the market with the ability to build these kind of projects, such as the conference and such as the Tripsguard application to hit the market. But that's, in terms of like surviving, that's the minimum that you can do, but that's not even close to the scale that we had to be in at this level. As a general information, we've raised $2 million to date for Avian. Previously at Rapid API, we've raised over $60 million, but that's a different scenario. And then, 2020 should have been our year to raise our $8 million round A. It should have been the year for us to grow, but that's something that we had to deal with. And that's basically how we try to approach this. So starting to work from the customer, and I think Natalie said something about this at the beginning, about not thinking about investments as a goals, and that's true, but it's not even about thinking or not thinking about investments. Investment, as Neta mentioned, is just a milestone. The only thing that you should care about is your customer, and you have to know him like 360. Everything about your customer should be known. And that's something that we were really good at, because otherwise we could not start a conference. Otherwise we could not start TripsGuard. Otherwise we could not be in such a great touch with Amazon. Otherwise we could not move. So that's the only thing you should care about. You have to be obsessively thinking about what is the needs that are constantly changing, by the way, of your specific target audience, and how do you tackle that in the fastest manner possible. And if you're a startup, the only thing you should care about if there's a lot of these kind of people and you can address them very, very fast. Cool. So if you have any questions about side projects, fundraising, whatever, feel free. And yeah, Jonas, right?
Yeah, I have a question. This TripsGuard, was that kind of like a side project, or was it that the whole team just focused in and they were like, okay, we're doing this, and because we have to do it fast to be able to implement it in this crisis and so on. I'm wondering how much is the like intensity level? Is it like, okay, 10% of the company does this, or it's like full blown?
So no, not the whole team was on it, because it was a side project and it was just something that popped up and it was easy to deliver. I mean, easy relatively, right? We had to cover more than 200 countries with information timely about travel restrictions. But yes, it was a side project, and we did a few side projects. Some of them died. So for example, I can tell you that we've built a conference platform for our conference, because all the other conference platforms were not available at the beginning. But after that, this market exploded. So we tried to sell other conferences as well with our platform, and that didn't work out, for example. We made a little bit of bucks, but it wasn't big. But if we're talking about TripsGuard, we started selling an API with all of this information that we have on TripsGuard. And so that worked really, really well. So we basically allocated resources to different side projects. All were basically in the scope of our work, to try to iterate as many projects as possible and see what works. Yeah, and so that's basically the thing. Any other questions? I think we're good.
I would like to ask you a question, like, because a lot of startups are like, at least happens to me too. Like when I hear you say, oh, and then just, Amazon knocked on our door and then we're working with them. How do you make that happen? How do you actually approach Amazon?
So here's my belief. It's a very deep one, because, in terms of like pivots, at Rapid API, we did 5 pivots until it exploded. At Avian, we did like 2 until we got to TripsGuard, which is, relatively successful in a market that is basically on hold. So when you touch specific point of a pain that the customer really has, they will get there. They will come to you. You need to work really hard on distribution and PR, and you have to work on marketing. And we did a lot of stuff to reach this 5-6 million people so far. But it was all about, it was not paid ads. It was not, content. It was purely distribution through social media and stuff. Now, since somebody at Amazon used the TripsGuard to move from one place to another and have all the information about his core safety, they brought us in. So we didn't really approach anybody. We didn't even think that it's possible, actually. That, turn it into voice and put it on Alexa, it was not on our thoughts. But when you touch a point in which the customer really loves how you solve his problem and how you touch their pain point, they are coming. And I can tell you that many press centers from all over the world, Argentina, Singapore, Europe, Israel, US, many organizations, insurance companies, travel companies using TripsGuard to deliver this information. So once you're really solving a problem, and it might be big or small, they are coming to you because it's important for them. So that's how we got to Amazon.
Would you say that the Israeli startups are doing something Israel specific when it comes to marketing and promotion?
Well, I don't think that Israeli entrepreneurs are really good at marketing and promotion. You better try to talk to great marketeers from New York or from San Francisco, just because they have larger markets they can learn on. Israel is a relatively small country, so you don't really have as much consumers as possible to try market to. So Israelis are not probably the best tier in terms of like marketing and distribution. What Israelis are really good at is speed. So take any other entrepreneur I've ever met and you put them on a line. The Israeli entrepreneur, you can say it's chutzpah, you can say any other stuff that I've heard so far, but it's fact that when an Israeli entrepreneur wants to get somewhere, he's trying to do that as fast as possible. Now, the cool thing about speed is that the many times speed is basically defining how much times you can fail on a specific timeline, right? So you can take one person who's trying to achieve something in an hour, and you can take an Israeli entrepreneur who tries to achieve 10 things in an hour. He's probably going to fail 9 of the 10, but he's going to succeed at the one by the end. While other entrepreneurs I've seen around the world, and that's not like generalized, I can see that, specifically Israelis just really love moving fast. They will probably succeed because they had the ability to fail much more times. And you can hear Elon Musk saying the same thing, right? You can't overwork somebody if he's working 24/7. And so that's something that is probably in our culture. But it's not like specifically Israeli. It just, in the Israeli community, it's really common.
So one thing we haven't touched upon is like, what do you do? Like, so if you fail, which a lot of people do, what are we supposed to learn from that? I mean, how do we move on? What type of questions do you need to ask yourself once you fail?
It's a good question, and it's a matter of focus, and it's a matter of one thing that I've learned in the last year is that if you're really curious and not even passionate is a big word, but if you're really curious about the specific issue, you don't really care about failing. Like the word failing is not really there. It's just you found a way not to do something, or you just found a way not to approach a specific issue. And you're really curious to find a solution for this, or you're really curious to win this specific game, or you're really curious to see this specific customer, happy about this specific issue. So it's not even about failing. Failing is very big, right? It feels really bad when you say failing, but it's about iterating as much as possible until you find what you actually want to solve. Now, the biggest problems, entrepreneurs have is that it's really hard to decide what kind of problem you want to solve. There's so many. It's like watching Netflix, right? You have so many ways and so many opportunities, and then you fall asleep. That's how I feel about Netflix, by the way, because you have a lot of stuff to browse. But what you do want to do is to deeply understand what you really care about and try to solve this problem as many times as possible. Now, money in this case is your air balloon, right? Is how much you have resources to approach this specific issue. And that's why speed comes into this formula as a winning formula, because the more times you're trying to iterate on a specific problem, the more chances you have to win this over. And it doesn't really, promise anything, but at least it just increases your chances.
I think you have a very good point about speed, because we meet a lot of Danish entrepreneurs who, they want to do things right. And so they move slowly but surely, and very well organized. But speed, the velocity element is just often more or less absent, actually. And I think that's one of,
Yeah, and if I may, I've been talking about with friends, from the community a lot about this stuff. The right way to approach a business is slow and steady. The right way to grow is slow and steady. And if you're doing a service, or if you're doing just a regular business in which you know your customers, there are not a lot of them, you're not trying to disrupt anything, you're just building a business, the right way to approach this is slow and steady. The problem or the opportunity or just the way it works about startups is that if you think about the ecosystem, it's pumped up with venture capitals that their whole thing is to give return to their investors. And they need their investors to make 10x on their money, which is impossibly hard in any other investment mechanism. So you need to get to a market that is large enough to give them the 10x return that they need back. And so that's where speed comes in. So it's all artificially designed, right? In a normal business ecosystem, you need to grow slowly. You need to grow in a steady way. You need to make sure that you're growing and you're having the control over your business. Startups and what's so-called product market fit is when you're out of control completely. You cannot say that Robinhood now in the US, for example, as the investment firm, they are a startup, 5 years old startup valued at over $40 billion. That's what took Volkswagen, for example, 60 years to get to. 60 years, and we're talking 5 years, 25-year-old guys. So when you're thinking about startups, startups are not regular business, and that's why this specific speed advice or understanding the market advice is literally specifically to startups that have to grow fast in a big market, and not in a normal business that has a service or local stuff or whatever that is just serving the customers they need in a kind of a limited amount of manpower.
So it could be a strategic decision you have to take at a very early stage when you establish your company.
It's just, and that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs just don't really maybe know, because it's not really something that somebody talks about, but startups are artificial stocks. They're designed to grow very fast. They're designed to explode. That's why they 95% of failure, because it's impossibly hard to artificially take a valuation of a company with 5 people and make it $50 billion, which what the VCs need. It's really, really, really hard. And you do that only if you know that there's a huge amount of people that need what you do, and they need it urgently and now. And that's why it's so hard to pick an idea that will be, a startup matter. But from the other side, if you're doing a business, if you're doing a service, right? Let's say I'm doing a studio for designing, blockchain applications, for example. We have Fear here, and I love blockchain, so I'll say that. So you would probably go and say, okay, I have my first customer, I'll serve him by myself. And then I have 5 customers, I'll bring another person to work with me. And then I have 20 customers, I'll bring another team of 5 people. Startups do not grow this way. Startups bring, they have 1 customer that bring 30 people, and they have to grow very, 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 very fast all the time, because the only thing that their investors are caring about is the valuation. And the only reason they care about this is because their LPs, the investors of the investors, care about the return because they're in high risk return. So it's all artificially designed. And you have to understand this game before you're getting into the startup world.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions? No, it doesn't seem to be the case. Shy audience today. Which is perfectly fine. So thank you very much to Netta and Fear and Mickey for your insights on how to establish a good base being a startup and thereby be resilient when a crisis hit, and also to hear about what you can actually do when the crisis has hit and change your business. I promised you that we would hear from Morten Møller, who is leading an important project in Denmark, well, actually in all of Europe, on how to prevent business failure and what to do when there's no way out of a business failure. Morten, so we'll wrap this up. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lasse. My name is Morten Møller. I am the program manager of the Early Warning program here in Denmark, and I'm also the network coordinator of the Early Warning Europe network. And I think we all enjoyed hearing the speakers talk about resilience, and maybe I can actually shed a little bit of light on these resilience factors. Lasse, will you allow me to share my screen? Are you sure? Because it says host has disabled screen sharing. Now it's good?
Should be good now.
Yeah, it's there. Perfect. Boom. Okay, so I'm really trying to switch this into presentation mode, and I don't know if I'm actually getting this right. How many screens can you see? 1 or 2 on this one?
Like it's one, but it's 2 different slides basically. Or
Yeah, and how do I disable that one?
that's a good question.
Okay, so we're just gonna do something else. Boom. Okay, let's just get this. As I can't seem to make the presentation mode work very well in Zoom, let's just get it this way. So several of you were there in the first webinar 1 week ago, and you already heard that the Early Warning Europe program has been around for 15 years in Denmark, and the last 5 years in a lot of European countries. So I'd like to jump directly to our new effort, which is to strengthen the early warning initiative by taking all the knowledge that's been accumulated over the years and putting it into the management advice that's given to startup companies. The whole thing is about building resilience among startup companies before the company is created, during the creation process, and in the first difficult months and years when everybody is struggling to turn it into a success. Our target group is people in vocational training, it's universities, and it's the business advisory and promotion systems in Denmark, Finland, Poland, Spain, and Greece. So what we do is we work with a set of indicators of resilience. And if I was actually able to share the screen so that I only got 1 slide instead of 2, then this would be more readable. But just generally, I'm not going to run through all these indicators, but to say that we came up with these 31 indicators that are not they're not sector specific or specific of a company type. These are the kind of things you need no matter what company you work with. We identified them based on research that has already been done and literature on business resilience. And then we started looking at, okay, so how does this look in reality in the 5 countries? And we got a few surprises along the way. So we tested it on a large group of respondents from the 5 countries. These are students, and they are people who already have companies. And we found out that among students, the 3 most important skills to have were communication, reliability, and work ethics. Whereas entrepreneurs who already have their companies, they agree that reliability is important to have, but they emphasize integrity in running your business and the capacity to identify and assess risks as they come. And for us, it was kind of strange that the 2 groups reacted so differently to these indicators. And I think it goes to show that when you're a student about to start your own company, your expectations are different from the reality you'll be out working in. And that led us to look a little bit at what are the needs and what is the reality. So basically, how important were these skills assessed to be, and how prepared did the respondents feel to actually be out there and managing these topics? And we found that those quite a lot of mismatch in the two groups. For instance, the top 3 skills among students where they felt that these were the most important, but they were the least prepared to handle these things, were the topics of self-confidence, networking, and communication. And it's quite clear that this list, I mean, these are soft skills. They're not Excel spreadsheets or anything that you learn as a metric, quantitative thing. These are really things inside the minds of the entrepreneur. Whereas in the minds of people who already have their companies, what they assess to be the most important, but where they feel the least prepared, are time management, networking, and planning and organization. And when we go into things like time management and planning and organization, these are actually things that you can put into spreadsheets and that you can learn in a quantitative way. So again, we see that the perspective is very different among students and among entrepreneurs. And we also see that when we look at the curriculums of entrepreneurship training and education and support in all of the countries, these things don't actually seem to have very high priority anywhere. And for us, it's striking to see that the only thing we did was basically come up with an indicator list and ask people, and that in decades of entrepreneurship advice, no one has really apparently cared to do this in any of the countries, and it's not reflected in the trainings and the materials that are in circulation already. And that is the gap that we want to bridge with the Rescue project. So finally, just to say, Rescue is not it's not a closed gentleman's club or anything like that. We're an open community, and right now we are testing these materials in a piloting phase among entrepreneurs in all 5 countries. You're all very welcome to join the piloting and see if you can learn something about your own business, or maybe a few hints and tricks on crisis detection and crisis management. And well, the big bona fide dimension of what we're doing is that, well, we're sort of paving the way for making tomorrow's entrepreneurs more resilient and more knowledgeable about these things. So if anyone is interested, drop me an email and I'm sure we can figure something out. And that's all for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Morten. Thank you very much. It's super important work, and it's always interesting to learn more about your findings. Thank you very much to all of you and to our speakers today. If there's like one take-home lesson, I think it is that we must be obsessively focused on the changing needs of our customers, and that's the lesson of the day. Never forget, the customers basically, and adjust accordingly. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next week.
Bye, everyone.